Hello, Salt Lords. On this week's episode of Table Salt EDH, I will be playing a commander so terrifying and so spooky that I am sure to beat the boys out of only fear. Nah, it's actually not that bad. The card I'll be playing this game is Rakdos, Lord of Riots. While it doesn't have fear, it certainly is spooky looking. And the two things that you want to be doing with a Rakdos deck is to cast a lot of pinger spells that cost as little as possible. That way, when you can cast Rakdos, you can be able to take advantage of his second ability that allows you to cheat out huge creatures, Eldrazi creatures, ideally, out onto the battlefield for as cheap as possible or even completely free.
What's up, guys? Oh, wait a minute. You probably can't really see me here. Hey, sorry about that. I got this, bite on my neck. I woke up with it one day. And it's been bugging me ever since. And I'm just really sensitive to light. So this is about as much as I can take right now. So anyways, it's your boy Sterling. This week, I will be playing Edgar Markov, Vampire Legend. He has Eminence. Whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. He has First Strike, Haste, and whenever he attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. So not only do you get to make these sick-ass tokens, but he pumps all your vampires. Whether he's in the command zone or not, he's the greatest vampire of all time. And he's just one of my coolest favorite cards ever. So the strategy of this deck is to either go super wide, have a bazillion little tokens on the field, and just be able to swing through. No one can stop me. There's too many vampires on the field at once. This thing is really hurting. I think I keep biting my lip, too. Anyways. Or I sacrifice those vampire tokens for value. That's the play, and my goal this week is to make sure Keith fucking loses. That is it. I just want to drink his blood. I mean, make sure he loses. That's it. He cannot win a third time, and that's my only goal. See you later.
Hey everyone. In hiding. It's weird out right now. But it's the spooky episode. So things are a little frightful out there right now. My name's Dominic, and I'm here to say that I'm playing Muldrotha, Gravetide. Hey guys, apparently when you summon a bunch of things back from your graveyard, causes things to actually come back. So this game, I'm going to be the one pulling things out of my graveyard. I'm going to be pulling things like Marin out, supercharge my deck to constantly pull things out. I'm going to be throwing things into my graveyard like Filth, Wonder, and Brawn to give my creatures evasion through either Trample, Flying, or Swamp Walk, something like that. I'm going to be rolling through and pulling lands back out. I'm going to be sacking things, getting them back, playing them again. I'm going to be trying to swing in with as much damage as possible. Now, Keith has won 2 games in a row, and we can't let him win a third. So my main goal this week is going to be taking Keith out as soon as possible. And I think you'll see that's going to be other people's goals this week too.
Once upon a salty time, a hero prevailed not once, but twice. 3 companions stood by his side, but soon they filled with jealous pride. An evil, vengeful pact they made to send our hero to his grave. They conjured up a wicked spell and summoned ghouls straight from hell. Vampires, grave conjurers, and demons to plague our hero for no good reason. The 3 mad men cackled with glee as they planned their treason for Hallows Eve. But unknown to the fallen 3, corrupted lands listened carefully, and once made aware of their plan, the lands lent our hero a helping hand. But no debt can ever go unpaid, as our hero met a horror who grieved within its waste, and the horror spoke with a wretched voice as our hero made his final choice. He sold his soul, and now he waited to be consumed by Yarok, the Desecrated.
In case you're wondering who the hero of the story was, it's me. It's Keith. In this episode, I'm going to be playing Yarok, the Desecrated. The goal of Yarok is pretty simple. All I really care about is ETB effects, because with Yarok, ETB effects from a permanent I control trigger twice. Have a Far Haven Elf, you're going to get a land. With Yarok out, you get 2 lands. Eternal Witness, get a card back from your graveyard. With Yarok out, you get 2 cards back from your graveyard. Do you need to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or land with Acidic Slime? Well, if you have Yarok out, you get to destroy 2 of those things. Do you want to play Deep Forest Hermit and get 4 squirrels? Well, with the Yarok out on the field, you get 8 squirrels. And then if I have Panharmonicon out on the field at the same time as Yarok, now I'm getting 12 squirrels. Tripling up on the triggers. You see how it's going to go. It's the spooky episode, and nothing is more spooky than being arch enemy against 3 salty players who want nothing more than to see you lose. Nothing would make me more happy than to get 3 wins in a row, but I don't see that happening. So the goal for this week is to just hang on for dear life, and hopefully I can take some people down with me.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this special Halloween episode of Table Salt EDH. Keith starts us off by playing a Yavimaya Coast and passes. Sterling draws, and then plays a Plains and passes his turn. Sean draws, plays a Mountain, and taps it for Wayfarer's Burble. Dom draws, and announces that he's going to betray the heart and soul of this channel by making everyone happy, and plays an Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth.
Ooh, okay.
I'll take it.
That is
Yeah,
actually
right?
good.
Like I figured, providing a little.
Everybody's happy,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
That's a first. Welcome to Happy Players EDH.
He then passes his turn to Keith. Keith draws, drops an island, and then tells Sterling he's going to play his favorite card, which he initially says destroys all vampires on entry, but it's just Fibblethip. Keith passes.
Fibblethip's going to attack soon. He's going to attack Dom.
Look at Keith, once again targeting me. Just saying. Sterling draws, plays an Exotic Orchard, and then passes. Keith questions Sterling's conviction to win this game. Sterling announces his true intentions are simply to knock Keith out to prevent him from getting his 3rd win.
Sterling, are you planning on winning this game?
No, I'm just planning on you not winning.
Sean draws, plays a Swamp, and then passes his turn. While Mom and Dad are continuing to fight about Keith's potential 3rd victory, Dom plays a Command Tower, taps 2, and plays Sakura Tribe Elder. He then passes his turn. Keith draws, plays a Swamp, and then taps 3 for Kodama's Reach. He goes and grabs a Forest and an Islands because Urborg makes everything else a Swamp. He announces that since Dom's Urborg is providing such a quality service, he will not be attacking Dom. So instead, he swings Fibblethip at Sterling for 1, making him the Monarch. Keith passes his turn.
I'll pass my turn and draw a
I'd
card.
like to
And I'll
note
land.
that Keith's sticker as his Monarch symbol is not an indication that this is his channel. Sterling draws, but hold on. Sean, he's tapping 2 for Wayfarer's Bauble. Sterling continues his turn by tapping 2 for Boros Signet. Then he bounces that tapped Plains back to his hand to play Boros Garrison tapped. He passes his turn. Sean finally plays the mountain he grabbed from Wayfarer's Bauble. He then begins his turn by playing a Flamekin Village tapped. Then he taps 2 for a Rakdos Signet. At the end of his turn, Dom sacrifices the Sakura Tribe Elder to go grab a land. Sean then passes his turn. Dom plays a Forest, taps 2 for Perpetual Timepiece, worrying Sterling. Then he taps 2 more for Hermit Druid, further worrying Sterling. Everyone begins to slowly reevaluate their priorities for this game.
But no, you guys gotta all pay attention to me though. Don't pay attention to him.
Dom, you're dividing my attention a little bit. It's making this a little hard.
Don't worry, Sterling. I am on your side with your crusade. Dom passes his turn. Keith plays a Command Beacon and then taps 4 for Sky Shroud Clan, grabbing 2 forests.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to play Fact or Fiction. Keith pulls the top 5 cards from his library. He reveals a string of disappearances, an Endraze Forerunners, Shard Convergence, Urborg, and a Putrefy. He then chooses Sean to put them into 2 separate piles. Sean puts a string of disappearances and Putrefy in one pile, and Endraze Forerunners, Shard Convergence, and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth in the other. Keith looks over his options and chooses the larger pile, with Endraze Forerunners, Shard Convergence, and Urborg. He puts the remaining pile into his graveyard.
Sterling draws, then taps 5 for Vanquisher's Banner, choosing vampires. Sterling passes. Sean draws, then taps 3 for Theater of Horrors. In exchange for Hermit Druid's life, Sean requests 5 turns of no aggression coming from Dom. The table agrees that's too many turns. Dom counters with 3. Sean doesn't like this and dreadbores Hermit Druid anyway. Sean passes. Dom begins his turn by tapping 4 for Marin of Clan Nail Toth. Then, he taps the Perpetual Timepiece to put the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. He puts a Reminap Excavator and an Opulent Palace in. Then, he passes turn. Dom then remembers that Marin works even without experience counters. So, he digs through his graveyard and pulls the Sakura Tribe Elder back to his hand. Keith begins his turn by playing a Swamp. Then, he taps 5 for Yarok the Desecrated. Then, he taps 3 for Eternal Witness, grabbing 2 cards from his graveyard. He grabs Putrefy and Factor Fiction. Then, he attacks Sterling with Fibblethip for 1. Keith passes his turn. Sterling then taps 3, floating 1, for Stromkirk Captain. He enters alongside a vampire token thanks to Edgar Markov's ability. They both get +1/+1 counters, and Sterling draws a card thanks to Vanquisher's Banner. The token gets an additional +1/+1 counter thanks to Stromkirk's ability. Sterling then uses the floating mana and taps 2 more to cast Vampire Nighthawk, who enters with a vampire token as well. They get 2 +1/+1 counters, and Sterling draws another card. Sterling passes his turn. At the beginning of his turn, Sean exiles the top card of his library. Then he draws. Sean then taps 4 for Pestilence. Sean then passes his turn. Dom starts his turn by tapping 2 to play Rampant Growth. He drops a forest, then taps 2 more to play Sakura Tribe Elder. He sacrifices it to go look for an additional forest. This places an experience counter on him. At the end of his turn, he pulls Hermit Druid from his graveyard and puts him into his hand, thanks to Marin's ability. Dom then passes. Dom then fakes a play to interrupt Keith's turn. Keith begins his turn by tapping 4 for Panharmonicon. He then taps Yavimaya Coast for an island, pinging himself for 1, and 2 more to play Risen Reef. He looks at the top 3 cards of his library. None of them are lands. Keith then passes the turn. Sterling then taps 3 for a Commander Sphere. He taps that Commander Sphere for a Chromatic Star. Then he taps 2, 1 to sacrifice the Chromatic Star, drawing a card. The other to play Sign in Blood, drawing 2 cards, losing 2 life. Sterling then drops a Clifftop Retreat, which he then taps for a Wayfarer's Burble. He swings at Keith with Vampire Nighthawk for 4. In response, Keith casts Putrefy, destroying the Nighthawk. At the end of Sterling's turn, Sean taps 1 into Pestilence to deal 1 damage to each creature in each player, annihilating Keith's board. Sean starts by exiling the top card of his library. He then draws. Sean taps 1 into Pestilence, dealing 1 damage to each creature and player. Sean then taps 4 to cast Rakdos, Lord of Riots. He then casts a Swamp from exile. Sean then taps 1 to cast Thoughtseize from exile, targeting Keith. He selects Duplicant out of Keith's hand, which Keith then discards, and Sean loses 2 life. Sean then passes his turn. Dom draws, taps the Perpetual Timepiece to put the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. He then taps 3 to play Crucible of Worlds. He then plays an Opulent Palace from his graveyard thanks to the Crucible. Dom then taps 3 more to play Stinkweed Imp. At the end of his turn, Dom pulls Sakura Tribe Elder back from his graveyard thanks to Marin's ability. He then passes his turn. Keith begins his turn by playing a Swamp.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and salty MTG players around the globe, you guessed it, it's that time. We're gonna play Fact or Fiction. Keith reveals the top 5 cards of his deck. He reveals an Elvish Rejuvenator, a Forest, a Soul Ring, a Deadeye Navigator, and a Beast Within. He then chooses Sean to separate them into 2 piles. Sean picks the Deadeye Navigator and puts that in a pile all on its own, and the remaining 4 cards in a second separate pile. He then pretends to think about it, but then picks up the Deadeye Navigator, discarding the remaining 4 cards.
Keith then taps 3 more to play Realms Uncharted, searching his library for 4 land cards with different names. He chooses Mortuary Mire, Opulent Palace, Opal Palace, and Command Tower. He chooses Sean once again to determine which 2 he keeps and which 2 he places in his graveyard. Sean chooses to move the Command Tower and the Mortuary Mire to Keith's graveyard. Keith then taps 3 to play Pilgrim's Eye, searching his library for 3 more basic land cards, thanks to Yarok and Panharmonicon. He grabs 2 islands and a forest, because he needs more land. Keith then ends his turn, having to discard a hand size. Boo-hoo. Sterling drops an Isolated Chapel, untapped thanks to Urborg. He then taps 3 for Fervor. Sterling then taps 4 for Kalidas, Trader of Get. He enters with a Vampire token, and both get 2 +1/+1 counters. Despite promising Dom that he wouldn't play a specific spell, and that would drastically impact Dom's deck, that being Kalidas, he forgets his promise and plays Kalidas anyways. Sterling then draws from playing a Vampire. He then taps 2 to sacrifice Wayfarer's Burble to grab a Plains. Sterling then swings 2 3/3 token Vampires and a 5/6 Kalidas with lifelink at Keith. Keith blocks Kalidas with Pilgrim's Eye, exiling Keith's creature. Sterling gains 5 life from Kalidas, and Keith takes 6 damage from the tokens, bringing him down to 31. That makes Sterling the Monarch. Sean then taps 1 into Pestilence to deal 1 damage to each player and creature. Sean then exiles the top card of his library thanks to Theater of Horrors, revealing a Maga, Traitor to Mortals. He then taps 1 into Pestilence, dealing all players and creatures 1 damage. Sean then makes a deal with Keith to prevent targeted spells from coming his way for a couple turns. Sean then swings a 6/6 flying Rakdos at Sterling, taking Sterling down to 31. To everyone's horror, this means that creatures now cost 7 less for Sean this turn. This now makes Sean the Monarch. He then taps 4 to cast Diabolic Tutor to go look for a Meteor Golem, which he then casts for free. When the Golem enters the battlefield, he destroys Sterling's Kalidas. Sean then passes his turn. At the beginning of his turn, Dom requests that everyone reveal what creatures are currently sitting in their graveyards. Just to check. Dom throws out the possibility of handling Rakdos. Sean then offers a treaty for Rakdos' life. The group discusses Dom's options to either accept any offer from Sean or destroy him now. Deciding to let Rakdos stay for now, Dom instead taps 2 to cast Sakura Tribelder again. He then taps 5 to cast Gravebreaker Lamia. When it ETBs, he searches his library for a creature card to place into his graveyard. He debates between either Filth or Spore Frog to put into his graveyard. After some deliberation, he decides to place Filth, giving him Swamp Walk thanks to Urborg. You could say that play was filthy. Dom then taps the Perpetual Timepiece to place the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. How's that for a draw engine, Sean? He then sacrifices the Sakura Tribelder, adding an experience counter for Marin, and grabs a forest from his deck. Dom then ends his turn and, once again, like a broken record, pulls Sakura Tribelder back to the battlefield thanks to Marin. Keith taps 6 to cast Ulvenwald Hydra, and thanks to Yarok and Panharmonicon, can search his library for 3 basic lands and put them into play tapped. This makes Ulvenwald Hydra a 14/14. It was at this moment that 3 butts clenched tightly. However, surprisingly, Keith ends his turn. Sterling drops a Plains, and then taps 4 to cast Return to Dust during his main phase, targeting Pestilence and Panharmonicon. In response, Sean taps 2 into Pestilence, dealing everyone and all creatures 2 damage. Dom's Stinkweed Imp dies, and in response, Dom sacks the Sakura Tribelder to grab an island. This gives him 2 additional experience counters for Marin. Sterling then taps 6 to play Patron of the Vein. When the patron enters the battlefield, Sterling destroys Keith's Ulvenwald Hydra, when a creature an opponent controls dies, each vampire gets an additional +1/+1 counter. Sterling then swings a 7/7 flying Patron of the Vein at Keith, and a 4/4 Stromkirk Captain, and 2 4/4 vampire tokens at Sean. Keith has no blocks, takes 7, and goes down to 20. Sean blocks one of the tokens with Meteor Golem, killing the Golem, and takes 8 damage, taking him down to 22. That makes Sterling the Monarch. He passes his turn. Sean exiles the top card of his library, revealing a Plague Spitter. He then swings Rakdos at Sterling, dealing him 6 damage. This brings Sterling down to 22, and, for the first time on our channel, we actually have to track commander damage, because this brings Sterling to 12 commander damage from Rakdos. This makes Sean the Monarch. Sean then taps 3 for the Hammer of Perforos, giving all of his creatures haste. He then taps 2 to cast Butcher of Malakir, and then taps 1 for Lobber Crew, tapping it to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Then, making literally everything worse, he plays Artisan of Kozilek for free, Free, which then returns Meteor Golem back to the battlefield from his graveyard. Great. He destroys Keith's Yarok, completely ignoring Sterling's massive board state. He then casts Mirror Battlesphere, again, for free, generating 4 1/1 mirror tokens. Dear God, when will it end? Oh, right now. Sean passes his turn. Dom taps the Perpetual Timepiece to place the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. He then taps 6 to cast Muldrotha, the Spooky Tide. Dom then taps 3 to cast Beast Within, targeting the Artisan of Kozilek, giving Sean a 3/3 beast. Sean forgets the Butcher of Malakir trigger. Dom then swings an unblockable 4/4 Gravebreaker Lamia at Sean, dealing him 4 damage. This brings Sean down to 18, and this makes Dom the Monarch. At the end of his turn, Dom pulls Stinkweed Imp back to the battlefield thanks to Marin. Keith plays an island and, much like Scrooge McDuck, counts his lands. He taps 7 to recast Yarok. Dom comments how we could really use a Cyclonic Rift at this moment. Keith passes his turn. Sterling taps 2 to play Skull Clamp and attach it to his Patron of the Vein. Sterling then swings an 8/8 Patron of the Vein, a 4/4 Stromkirk Captain, and a 4/4 Vampire token at Sean. He also swings 3 4/4 Vampire tokens at Keith. In response, Keith taps 7 to cast Cyclonic Rift Overlord, returning all non-land permanents he doesn't control to their own hands. We would like to note that Keith errantly counted the damage from Sterling's attack before he played a Cyclonic Rift, bringing his life total down to 7. Sterling then taps 2 for the Boros Signet, and then taps 3 to replay Commander Sphere. He then taps 3 to recast Stromkirk Captain, and then taps 2 more to recast and equip Skullclamp. Sterling passes his turn. Sean taps 2 to recast Rakdos Signet. He then taps 3 to cast Theater of Horrors. He then taps 3 more to cast Lobber Crew. Sean then passes his turn. Dom taps 4 to recast Marin of Clan Nel Toth. He then taps 2 to cast Animate Dead, to borrow Sean's Artisan of Kozilek, only with -1/-0. He sadly does not get the casting trigger from the Artisan. Dom then taps 2 to recast Perpetual Timepiece, which he then taps to place the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. Dom moves to discards 2 cards, and on his Marin trigger, moves Sakura Tribelder back to the battlefield, once again. Dom passes. Keith taps 5 to cast Deep Forest Hermit, generating 8 2/2 squirrels. In this corner, we have 8 squirrels. In the other corner, we have a giant Eldrazi. Who will win? Keith then taps 8 to cast Endraze Forerunners, giving all of his creatures +4/+4 until the end of the turn, thanks to Yarok. Keith then swings at Dom with a 7/9 Yarok and a 7/7 Endraze Forerunners. Dom blocks the Endraze Forerunners with the Artisan of Kozilek, and then blocks Yarok with Sakura Tribelder. Then, before the Elder dies, Dom sacks it to search for a basic land card. Dom then takes 6 from Trample, bringing him down to 27. Keith gains 7 life from Yarok, bringing him back up to 14. That makes Keith the Monarch. He then passes his turn. Sterling taps 4 to cast Day of Judgment, destroying all creatures. Since Stromkirk dies with the Skull Clamp attached, Sterling draws 2 cards. Dom gets 2 more experience counters from his creatures dying. Sterling then taps 3 to cast Drana, Liberator of Malakir, which also nets him a vampire token thanks to Edgar. Each gets a +1/+1 counter. Sterling then passes his turn. Sean exiles a Havoc Festival off the top of his library thanks to the Theater of Horrors. He then taps 4 for Vidalcan Orrery. Sean then passes his turn. Dom taps 6 to recast Muldrotha. Everyone cheers. He then taps 4 to cast Marin from his graveyard, finally using Muldrotha's ability. He then taps Perpetual Timepiece to place the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. He then taps 1 to cast Demonic Vigor from his graveyard, enchanting Marin, giving her a +1/+1 counter. At the end of his turn, he plays Corpse Connoisseur from his graveyard thanks to Marin's ability. When Corpse Connoisseur enters the battlefield, he searches his library for a creature card, puts that into his graveyard. Dom grabs Wonder and places that into his graveyard. All of his creatures now have flying. Dom ends his turn. Keith taps 3 to cast Manglehorn, destroying Dom's Perpetual Timepiece. He then taps 6 to cast Deadeye Navigator, soul bonding it with Manglehorn. Keith then taps 2 to flicker Manglehorn, destroying Sean's Vidalcan Orrery. In response, Sean taps 3 to flash in Plague Spitter from exile. The Orrery is then destroyed. Keith flickers Manglehorn a 3rd time, destroying Sterling's Skull. Keith flickers Manglehorn a 4th time, 4 times, destroying Sterling's Vanquisher's Bane. He then passes his turn like a boss. Sterling taps 3 to cast Fervor. He then taps 6 to recast Patron of the Vein, netting him a vampire creature token. When the patron enters the battlefield, Sterling destroys Keith's Deadeye Navigator. When Keith's creature dies, all of Sterling's vampires get +1/+1 counters. Sterling then taps 3 to cast Savai Crystal. He then attacks Keith with a flying 5/5 Patron of the Vein and a flying 3/4 Drana, Liberator of Malakir. He also attacks Sean with 2 2/2 vampire tokens. Keith takes 8 damage, bringing him down to 6. Sean takes 4, bringing him down to 14. All of Sterling's vampires pump +1 since they dealt damage. Sterling passes his turn. At the beginning of Sean's upkeep, each player and each creature are dealt 1 damage from Plague Spitter. Keith goes to 5, Sterling to 21, Dom to 26, and Sean to 13. Then, Sean exiles the top card of his library thanks to Theater of Horrors. He plays a swamp and then taps 3 to cast the Hammer of Perforos. Meanwhile, in La La Land, Sterling finally remembers that he became the Monarch last turn. Sean then taps 4 to recast Rakdos, who has haste from the Hammer of Perforos. He then swings Rakdos at Sterling for 6. Sterling cannot block it and takes 6 damage, bringing him to 15 with 18 commander damage from Rakdos. Sterling is teetering on the edge of our first commander damage death. Sean then plays Meteor Golem for free, destroying Muldrotha. Dom places Muldrotha in his graveyard and gains an additional experience count. Sean then plays Mirror Battlesphere for free again, creating 4 1/1 Mirror tokens. Dom taps 3 to cast Embodiment of Agonies. Counting the unique mana costs of non-land cards in his graveyard, the Embodiment of Agonies becomes a 15/15. Then, Dom taps 7 to cast Shield Dread, Whispering One. Dom then swings with a flying unblockable 4/5 Marin and a flying unblockable 3/3 Corpse Connoisseur at Keith. Keith, unable to block, takes 7 lethal damage, thereby saving the channel from the dictatorship of Keith. The resistance has won. Yay! At the end of Dom's turn, he returns Muldrotha from his graveyard to the battlefield, thanks to Marin's ability. At the beginning of Sterling's turn, he sacrifices a vampire token because of Shield Dread. Sterling pays 2 life to play a Godless Shrine untapped, bringing him down to 13. Sterling then taps 4 to cast Miri the Cursed, netting him a vampire token. Sterling then taps 6 for Edgar Markov. He then swings at Sean with Edgar, Patron of the Vein, Miri, and Drana for a total of 16 flying and 5 on the ground. Unable to block the flying, Sean dies to Sterling's Vampiric Onslaught. Since Drana dealt damage, all of Sterling's vampires pump +1. Sterling passes his turn. At the beginning of Dom's turn, he returns World Shaper from his graveyard to the battlefield from Shield Dread's ability. Dom then taps 2 to cast Perpetual Timepiece from his graveyard. He then taps 1 to play Siren Storm Tamer from his graveyard, the game-winning move. He taps 2 to cast No Rest for the Wicked from his graveyard. Dom then taps 5 to play Gravebreaker Lamia, searching for and placing Brawn in his graveyard, giving his creatures trample. Now, wait, hold on a minute. We have an imposter in our midst. Keith, after his death, has decided to quit Table Salt EDH and start an Among Us streaming channel within our MTG channel. Table Salt EDH will now change our tagline to MTG with a pinch of Among Us. Back to our original scheduled programming. Dom swings with a 15/15 flying, trample, unblockable Embodiment of Agonies, a 4/5 Marin, and a 6/6 Muldrotha at Sterling for a total of 25 damage. In response, Sterling casts Go for the Throat, targeting the Embodiment of Agonies. In response to that, Dom taps his Opulent Palace for an island to sacrifice the Siren Storm Tamer, countering the spell targeting his Embodiment of Agonies. All of the damage makes it through, and Dom wins the spooky episode. Yeah! Everybody cheered.
Hey, look at that. You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for sticking it out. We for sure appreciate it, as any and all support helps our channel grow and our content get better. We're sorry that we couldn't get this episode out on time for Halloween as originally scheduled. As life happens, things get in the way, and well, if you're salty about it, then I guess you're welcome, because that's really why you're here, right? So stay tuned for more content. If after the video you still like what you see, get after that like and subscribe button. And as always, feel free to find us on Twitter at EDHSalt or shoot us an email at tablesaltedh@gmail.com.